And we are recording. Okay, so welcome to the HL7 Fire Connect-a-thon 20 track preparation session for the CCDA Implementation-a-thon track. It's going to be held on January 12th and 13th in San Antonio, Texas. Today we are going to be covering some information about, I got my spot highlighter turned on. I'm not really sure I like that. Let me see if I can get that to turn off. And my other monitor over here. Back to my normal pointer. Today we are going to talk about care plan stuff, and I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping to get us started. If you are logged in, or if you have interest and you're coming to these sessions, please be sure to share your email address with Dave Hamill. His address is here on the introductions slide, dhammill@hl7.org. Besides posting information out on the HL7 listservs, the Confluence page, and the Zulip chat channel, we also can email you directly as we begin to understand the folks that are committed to attending the track, so that we can have more of a push mechanism for getting messages out to you. If you send us your email stating that you're going to be registering for this event, then we can more easily push information to you. If you are going to register, this is the information for the registration link that's available on the hl7.org website. And there's also a page on Confluence that gives you just some tips. You can see some screenshots on how to check the boxes to get yourself signed up correctly for the Connect-a-thon only, if that's all you're going to be attending and not participating in the rest of the work group meeting. It's a little bit tricky, so we just figured we'd give you some tips on doing that. And then I wanted to note that on our resources page, after last week's meeting, we did update the one additional link here to give you a pointer to the CDA Examples Task Force search tool that is a great resource for finding accurate XML examples that you may want to use to begin a sample for yourself or to utilize in your own samples that you'll be using for the Connect-a-thon. It's a great resource if you haven't had a chance to look out there. In fact, some of the work that we're going to be doing at this Connect-a-thon, we're hoping to begin a process where there's a path to move from examples shared at the Implementation-a-thon into developing more cutting-edge examples that can go out and feed and fuel the example search tool, so that as the community begins to come to consensus about some of these things that we're looking at in the Implementation-a-thon, then right away we'll be able to add examples that the rest of the community can reference as well. The prep that we're doing today will be for the Sunday Q1 session at the San Antonio's Implementation-a-thon. We'll have a whole session devoted to care plan documents. And if care plan documents is not something that you're interested in, I just wanted to remind all of the participants that you have full access to the whole of the Fire Connect-a-thon. So if that's a morning that you decide to spend a couple hours, 90 minutes or so, heading over into one of the other rooms, working with one of the other Fire Connect-a-thon tracks, that certainly is one of the things that's an opportunity for you to take advantage of. These prep sessions have a goal of giving us access to relevant supporting materials that really helps us get ready for a productive experience at the 12th and 13th of January. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that while we're going through the prep session, the examples that we're talking about creating and what we're aiming to do, we're aiming to have them ready by January 9th, so that the group has the full bulk of the material that's available to support our discussions ahead of time. And that way we will spend the majority of our time being able to dig into the subject, find out how different implementers may be doing things in different ways, and help us to come to greater consensus on doing things consistently. So just wanted to kind of put that January 9th mark out there as the deadline when we're hoping to have all of these pre-meeting assignments kind of turned in. If you've missed any of our prior preparation sessions, this slide has links to them. You can also find them off from the Confluence page where it talks about the prep sessions. We have completed 2 so far, and the YouTube recordings are available to you here off from these links. And today, our one Tuesday session, all the rest of them will be Wednesdays like we have been doing, but because of the ONC meeting, we had to scoot this one up a little bit. So I'm sorry if you had to miss it, but there will be a recording posted later on today that you can watch asynchronously to get caught up. Let's start with our topic, our homework that was assigned, kind of the pre-work that we went over before today's session. I wanted to remind everyone about this IHE profile that's called DSS Document Summary Section. We're going to look at a couple of interesting parts of that document today, and then we'll be talking more generally about what we aim to do to get ready for the care plan discussion and what kinds of things we want to focus on as we look at improving our ability to generate care plan documents in a consistent way. I wanted to start with reminding everybody, I think I'm going to put my screen for this slide up into full screen mode. I wanted to remind everyone that in volume 1 of the consolidated CDA specification, at the back in an appendix, there's a very important diagram that informs us about the intention behind the care plan document specification that's in consolidated CDA. This diagram has its origins in the original care plan domain analysis model that was developed by HL7 and the patient care work group. And what's important about this is to understand the terms and concepts when we talk about the 4 cornerstone sections in every care plan document. And I wanted to talk about how you understand, how you go about reading this. So the cornerstone sections are the health concerns section right here that you see. And this health concerns section has some relationships associated with it that allow you to have supporting observations, support that concern, and it's recursive in nature in that there could be a health concern that has as a component some other concerns. And so it's a complex sort of cornerstone section, but that's the way it works. There also can be concerns that are related to other concerns, kind of cross linkages between concerns. That's what that part of the picture means. And then the next cornerstone section is called the goals section. And the goals section includes goals which then may refer to certain health concerns for which this goal has been established to address that concern. The goals section is one of the cornerstone sections. Some people see it as slightly different, but I always describe it as there's a certain concern which then has a goal that is established to work on that concern. The third cornerstone section is called the interventions section, and this section includes all the many different kinds of activities that can be done and performed in order to make progress against this goal, which is in turn addressing this concern. And so you see here the relationship has reason, certain activity. We're doing this activity because we want to achieve this goal. That's what that relationship is. Again, there's a recursive concept that certain interventions can refer to other a relationship, not so much recursion, but just cross-relating interventions to other interventions, and that's what that section is about. And then the final cornerstone section is shown in a kind of a funny way here. This whole big gray block is around what in the care plan document turns out to be a single cornerstone section. It happens to have a name of Health Status Evaluations and Outcomes. So it's a compound kind of section that includes information about health status evaluations and information about outcomes. Now, in the diagram that is presented in the appendix for Consolidated CDA, and what you see in the specification, is a fair amount of clarity or focus on giving implementers some guidance on how to create outcome observations. And an outcome observation ties together. It has a reason for this outcome related to certain interventions, and the outcome is evaluating a particular goal, and the outcome observation demonstrates or supports observations about making progress towards the goal. And what we have learned over the past few months, or maybe even the past year, with various different implementers who've been working with this, is that the specification didn't really include any guidance around how to record these evaluations, these health status evaluations. It alludes to them, it describes them and the purpose of the section, but there were no entry templates specifically created and used as referenced out of this section. So it left implementers to utilize its open template, so you can have your own creativity about how to go about representing these health status evaluations. But we have recently made some STU comments against Consolidated CDA, and we have begun to clarify for implementers that this is the section where assessments would be represented, and outcomes, in fact, may have evidence in assessments that are given. These assessments also can be really the starting point, and so I've added this little teeny arrow right here to point you back up to these health concerns where we started. And even though this diagram is in a very linear kind of layout, there's other diagrams that I've seen in the nutrition status and possibly even in the pharmacy IG, where this pattern of relationships is shown in a circle. And it helps you to understand how it is that these assessments may in fact have been even at the starting point, as the care plan document records a snapshot of the care plan in time. It may be the care plan as it appeared after certain assessment had been done and certain concerns had been identified for which goals were established and interventions were planned. And so we just are trying to clear this up for everybody who's coming to the implementation-a-thon for this session, so that you're all on the same page with respect to understanding what the 4 cornerstone sections really do and how they work. In terms of preparing sort of this demonstration, or for capabilities where we really want to gather feedback from implementers who are creating care plan documents, one of the things that we thought would make this session most valuable is to understand and see some of the ways in which care plan documents are rendered, where they are similar and where they are different, in order to identify if there's potential for greater clarity around what really is expected in the way of information in these sections and how they are represented. So we have, the goal going into this is to collect by January 9th some good examples that we would be able to look at together, and then ultimately be able to supply so that the CDA examples search tool would offer more guidance that's relevant for care plan document creators and care plan document consumers. One of the things I did to jumpstart this work, because we're not at the total beginning of exploring care plan documents, one of the things that I have done is I've preloaded some examples out there from, let me just open the Dropbox site for a second. See if I can get to Dropbox. And I think I'm going to go there an easier way. The Dropbox site is available. I need to know your email address. That's another reason why in the beginning we talked about sharing email addresses. To me an email using the address that you like to have authorized to access things in Dropbox. And I'm going to go into the Sunday folder for Care Plan so that you can see the number of examples that have already been put out there for you to take a look at as you begin to put your own care plan example together, or just try and catch up with the work that's already evolving. Several different examples from Epic. They get progressively more complex as you go along from 1 to 2 to 3 in this level, from the simplest to the more complex, offering more of the relationships that go along between the different entries in the Cornerstone sections. We have some similar samples from Allscripts. We were previously calling those very early ones the beginner level. Just can you basically represent a concern and a goal and some interventions, and then progressively get more sophisticated in terms of hooking them together, linking them together. And one ELTSS, this is a long-term support services care plan. So we don't have an example of a nutrition care plan yet. We don't have an example of a pharmacy care plan yet. These are some of the places where we've seen some early exploration, but we do have a couple of just sort of general care plans for a person, and you can get a feel for it from there. I encourage you to, before you get started on your own, at least get out there and take a look. I will mention that, let's open one of these up. Why don't I open this? I put a copy of the most recent style sheet that's been developed for consolidated CDA. It actually supports base standard CDA R2.0 and the new CDA R2.1. So you can use this style sheet with any of these samples. Let me just open one. I'll start with something simple here and see what Allscripts put out there for Batman. I wanted to welcome I noticed we have a third participant out there. I wanted to say hi and welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Lisa.
Oh, hi, Linda. Welcome. I'm glad you guys could join. It was George and me all by ourselves for a few minutes there. And so it's a good thing that we're recording things, but for folks who are interested in looking at how to make use of some of these examples, I wanted to show that right now you have the ability to transform them using this default style sheet that has been established. And one of the things I like about doing that is where we do have 3 or 4 different examples. If you transform them using the same style sheet, it's easier to get a little bit of a notion of the comparison between the different care plans. And I think that's really where we need to start. I'm going to save a few minutes to talk about the cascading, the summary section, and why I think that's important for implementers to know about. But in looking at the samples that we had left at the tail end of last implementation-a-thon and sort of starting to pick up there is so much variation between what is represented in the health concern section, what's represented in the goals section, and the interventions, that even in that simplest case where we're trying to get those 3 cornerstone sections nailed in a consistent way, I think we're far from where we need to be. And one of the things I'd like people to think
Lisa,
about.
There's
yes,
a
Linda?
black box covering part of your screen, like around between goals and interventions.
We do not know what causes that, and I am not, I have tried to troubleshoot it. I don't know how to get rid of it. I apologize for it being there. I thought that it used to only be present when I was using, what is the one that we do with structured documents? Not Zoom, free conference call, but it sounds like it may be affecting my my GoToMeeting now too. So I'll have to see. Maybe I need to reboot or something like that. But it's some sort of a weird artifact that appears to be blocking a portion of my screen.
No problem. I just thought you might want to be aware in case you're saying something there to scroll it up.
Oh, thanks. I will, and I'll try a reboot before I do the recording the next time, and we'll see if that solves it. So here, what I wanted people to focus on is looking at what do we think it really means to represent health concerns in the health concerns section, and how do we expect them to be represented? Same for goals, and then same for interventions. The reason I think we need to start here is that if we don't get these foundational steps down, when you get into health status evaluations and outcomes section, which is even less well specified and a little bit hairier, then we'll reduce our chance of everybody getting on the same page. So I wanted to take 5 minutes and just sort of explain why I think this is important. If you go into the spec, so I'm going to take us into, hopefully this is volume 2 here, volume 2 of the consolidated CDA specification. And you look for, let's go to the care plan document. Good, I can't spell. Care plan document. And head down to page 95. We should see, trying to get to the spot where I have all my different sections. Here we go.
Interestingly, no black box here.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to get to the top of the care plan document. Not helping me. I'll try another way. Okay. So here, care plan document V2. I wanted to go into this section and show in the care plan document, in the health concerns section, there are 3 different types of entries that can be represented. The health status observation is a very simple kind of entry, and it just is a very straight up observation about a person's health status. Then there are 2 very complex types of entries, and they have almost exactly the same patterns to them, but one is about actual concerns that are present with a person right now, and the other is for concerns that are just the risk of something happening, but their syntax is almost exactly the same. And when you look at how many different possible patterns a health concern act, kind of an act wrapper that basically says this is a health concern, and you have the place where you can talk about the concern being active, and you can have an author on it, who is this concerned, who's tracking this concern, etc. It has that nature about the concern, but then the kind of information that's inside the concern can be everything from, I'm going to go down the phone. Sorry to have lost that. I got to get back there. There's all these different types of entries that can be inside the health concerns, inside the health concern. And what I'm not sure of is how implementers are handling, I get to search again. Consistent representation of a health concern that is about, let's say, a characteristic of the home environment, or a health concern about some kind of self-care activities, a health concern about a functional status observation. There's so many different possible entry patterns, and I shouldn't say entry patterns, because at this point the entry is the health concern, but it's a sub-pattern underneath there that can be, look at how many of these different patterns that are pointed to. So how are different implementers handling and determining what it will look like to report a health concern? And I'm really feeling like this is the place where we are going to need to start, because it's going to open a giant can of worms to understand, for interoperability's sake, what do we expect? How do we expect to see this? Does it make sense that an implementer would need to be prepared for receiving all of those different possible information patterns inside the health concern? Or is there a starting point that we want to agree? The spec was written so broadly to anticipate all kinds of possibilities, but in these baby steps that we're trying to make to go forward together, would we want to narrow down where we're focusing and come up with something that is a reasonable, how would you call it, sort of agreement around what pattern do we expect to see inside health concerns? And then the same for goals and the same for interventions. The interventions area is the same sort of predicament, where the spec itself is so broad about what you might find or represent in the interventions section that it leads me to wonder, how are implementers utilizing this massive amount of guidance to represent all these different possible kinds of intervention acts that there can be, and how are we going to move as a community to do that in a consistent and expected way together? George, I know Allscripts has had some experience with beginning to work with this, and I think the sample that I have up on the screen right now is an Allscripts sample. Is there anything that you can share from your experience as an implementer so far, how you deal with the complexity of the specification?
You may be on mute, George.
Oh, we may have lost him. Get him away.
Lisa, I'm wondering if it's that rule of 80-20 applies here. Is there some of this that is used the majority of the time, and then we have others that are only used rarely? And while the premise of you can't always boil the ocean, does it make sense to talk about the high-level use cases and try to get aligned on those first pass, and then come back and work on those that are, lesser used, and we could unify around those
Absolutely.
later?
I think that's what we really need to do, and I think that I'd like to use this implementation-a-thon to kind of do what you're saying in terms of the 80-20. What are we learning from implementers that are working with this? Which are the entry patterns, the information patterns that they are currently implementing, and check them off or highlight them or something like that, and then focus in on one or two or three that are the primary focus, and cut through some of the noise for these places. In the goals, it's not so hard. We just want to go as a simple goal observation, but we want to be clear, what are the data elements in a goal, and what goal data elements do we expect to be represented when you look at a document like this. Here, what are we seeing? We're seeing there's no headings at all, so you don't know. There's decrease your cholesterol started. This might be the goal value. We have a set date. We have some piece of information. This is a provider goal. Very inconsistent across the different samples to understand which component parts of the entry model are even being represented when a person is seeing them up in the human rendered part.
Right.
So I think what I want to spell out then in terms of where we're going and what we're trying to get ready for day 2, quarter 1 on care plan documents is for people to come ready to contribute from their own examples, where they are either creating documents or where you can look at the examples, the samples that I put out there in Dropbox, and come away saying, these are the expectations or the implementation assumptions that we're making right now to get started with these. These are the templates that we are focusing in on being able to use, and these are the key data elements that we expect to be rendered and consumable from those high use, or the 80% templates that are implemented. And do that for the 3 cornerstone sections: the health concerns, the goals, and the interventions. And if we can, nail this first bullet here, I think that could be considered really significant progress. We can do some work on bringing everybody up to speed about understanding how assessment information is being represented and how that fits into the health status evaluations part of the health status evaluations and outcomes section, just to make sure that everybody's kind of moving together on that progress. And then come up with some common understanding about those linkages, because I'm seeing a great deal of diversity on how one implementer is interpreting which things link to what and in what direction. And that's really about having a common understanding about how these arrows go from one place to another. Concerns don't link to goals. Goals link to concerns. And if we don't have common understanding about where the linkages will be represented and how they'll be represented, then it would be impossible to expect this data that is all about the linkages to be interoperable from one system to another. So that's my third goal here in terms of getting ready for what we want to be able to focus on. And then my final goal, because we did put the information out there, people would like to be able to talk about the document summary section. In going through these exercises myself, preparing for today, working with some of the samples, I feel like the material that's available in this document is really far ahead of our demonstrated capabilities right now. Yes, it's important to understand that a care plan document could have an additional section added to it, kind of post-coordinated into the document, where you're doing more to provide an alternate rendering view of the information. But until this is so advanced that until people are really being able to accomplish these first 3 bullets in a high level of called the black diamond slope, when we're not even really doing a good job of the bunny hill yet, you know.
And I think a lot of people are waiting for additional guidance because it's hard to jump into the, you know, you don't want to jump in until it's all sort of settled and you feel like everybody agrees. So otherwise you're reworking everything every 10 minutes.
Absolutely. So I think
no one has time for that.
No one does. No one does. And everybody's waiting on somebody else. And I think that the challenge here is to eat the elephant. So the best way to eat an elephant is 1 bite at a time. And I think that starting with the 3 main cornerstone sections and just stepping through what really are the data elements for this health concern, get that whittled down, agree about how to represent goals, and then whittle down where we're going to focus for representing interventions. That would be a massive progress if we get that far.
I agree, and documentation after that as to what we've all agreed upon, so we can point others to it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, we'll shift gears and talk about, let me ask, I want to do just a little bit of a round. I don't know, George, if you are on mute or had to step away when you come back, we are definitely interested in figuring out ahead of time who is coming to the IAT. And specifically, I'm interested in understanding who has interest in creating or consuming care plan documents. And let's stop and see who we have on the line at this point to see if it's just you and me. We lost George. Okay. So, Linda, I'm guessing that as a content consumer, that your focus in this space is primarily consuming and rendering a care plan?
Yes, eventually, like with our HIE clients, we may generate, you know, from a summary. Once we feel like everything is makes sense to do that with. But at the moment, I think we may be one of those seeing how the dust settles people.
Yeah. So if we could figure out how to make some simplifying assumptions to say, in the beginning, here's the simplest form of what we're going to try to do for representing health concerns, for representing goals, and for representing interventions. That simplification might help you get started sooner rather than having to just wait.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. It's a big, the learning is my main reason for being here, so that we can, the things that we're not clear about, we can move forward with confidence on.
I think one of the other things we might try and do, care plans seem to be a bit of a specialty area of focus right now. And now that the CDA Implementation-a-thon is happening in concert with the Fire Connect-a-thon, I know for sure that the folks who are working on pharmacy care plans and the folks who are working on the nutrition care plans, they're also there participating in fire tracks to be looking at that. So my hope is to reach out, and even if we only get them for Q1 on Sunday morning, to try and get as many people who have care plan interests into the room, so that this notion of, is there some simple approach that we can start with the spots where there really is 80% implementation currently. Get more people to come in and help us narrow it down. Maybe that would help.
And it would be good to understand that what we're doing aligns with the FHIR model as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if that, I think we do have a session where we're going to be talking about CCDA on FHIR, and we're going to be looking at some of the Excel sheets that are being used in the mapping project to provide guidance on how to map data that's represented in a CCDA document into a FHIR document representation using profiles that are already established.
You're right.
But
That's where it belongs.
I think the mapping of the care plan from a care plan document into a care plan resource is one of the trickier ones. So we probably won't be able to try and get there during this Connect-a-thon, given that we just need to focus on some of these, very basic things right now.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears and talk about, I guess there was one comment I wanted to make about the DSS guide from IHE. And, in the spirit of the Gemini project, which is running across IHE and HL7, I do think it's good to bring the community's attention to the fact that there are other CDA specifications that are developed in other places, and to highlight that a little bit. It's a very different kind of spec if you are not used to reading one. But I wanted to highlight, if you get the courage up and you want to take a look, I wanted to highlight two spots in the document that I think are really a good place to look. One of them is this chapter that's called X.4. This is the overview chapter. And if you dig in there around page 11, it gives you some of the fundamental concepts around what this profile is attempting to do. And you get a nice definition about what a document summary section is and how it could be constructed, this idea of constructing it dynamically or using a predefined kind of section template to construct it and tack it on later. And I think that's an interesting concept that anybody who's making care plans definitely would find valuable. There's a real nice diagram that gives you a notion of those cornerstone sections and how one of these extra summary section templates might be added onto a care plan and why that might be valuable. A little bit about how to do it. So I feel like that chapter, that overview chapter, is really useful. And the other thing that I think is valuable is in the area of the use case descriptions. I'm going to scroll back up to the table of contents to look at the use cases. There's a great variety of use cases in here, and I think for where we're at right now, the one that seemed most relevant was this care plan summary section right here, use case number 2, care plan summary section, page 17. So that would be the other place to focus if the document seems, overwhelming to you right now. Take a look at the overview and use case number 2, and then the Allscripts samples that we posted. One of them does have an example of including a summary section where they've tried to use some of those cross linkages between entries to produce a rendering that shows more of a matrixed view, the relationship between a concern and the goals that have been established for it and the activities that are planned in order to make progress towards that goal. So I think that's the best way to get something valuable out of this exercise. Let's shift gears and talk about planning for our next prep session. And our next prep session is going to get us ready for a different kind of activity. It's not so much focused on looking at samples and examples of XML and types of CCDA documents. It's much more exploratory in nature. But as the ONC pushes us towards understanding provenance as an important data element or data class to be wrestled with and for us to make progress on coming to some common agreements about what it is and how it will be represented here, specifically in CDA documents, we, I think, need to prepare ourselves for a meaningful conversation about what provenance is and how do we start to ask the right questions to get the group on the same page. So what I did, if many of you probably were involved in the working group session at the last working group meeting, where we had a very productive conversation, kind of driven out of some work that the Cerner group had done, to lead us to think through some of the different data elements that are available in the header and various entries of CDA document. And boy, that's that block, I think, that's giving me trouble right there. What can I do? See if I can move it out of the way. To be able to springboard off from that, Michelle Miller from Cerner supplied us with a Word document, which I have posted on the Confluence site. And this Word document is their attempt to solidify some of the things that they had been thinking about and talking about with respect to representing data provenance. And I have started adding comments and questions as I read through this document to note places where perhaps I had a different point of view on the subject, or a question that might make other people think about what they think belongs in this area, whether they agree or disagree with the information. We're going to use this document between now and next session to get people thinking about what are the right things that we need to be looking at and asking and trying to get to agreement on. And so the homework assignment is to open this. It's about a 3-page document, very lightweight. Open this document and have a read through it, and take a copy, annotate it, add comments, add whatever helps you remember where there are spots that you or your organization agrees or disagrees with those views, so that we can come together next prep session and have kind of a meeting about the meeting. So our meeting will be to clarify what our approach is going to be. What questions are we going to really hone in on? What things do we want to ask and get feedback from the community about, so that if we gather that information, we have a better chance of coming to agreement about something in the area of data provenance. That's the plan for December 5th. Linda, do you have any thoughts or ideas about what else we might need to do to prepare ourselves for a productive quarter on data provenance?
I think I haven't read the document yet, but I think that we can go simple to complex on provenance. I think the simple is not even well understood. So we need to very clearly make sure everybody's understanding even the hierarchy within a CDA around provenance. And then those header ones are highly complex. So I look forward to reading that document.
Yeah, and you know, the document I put out it was just a really kind offer. Somebody has to start the conversation usually, and it helps everybody to push up against that information and see where their questions and what thoughts it brings to bear. So it's not like a document, it's not a balloted specification or anything else like that. It's just a starting point to get us thinking about what it means. I
use the term straw man. People don't know what their opinion is until they see someone else's.
Very good. very good.
And you're posting, where is the location again that you're posting that?
Thank you. It is out on the Confluence site. Let me bring that tab over here. And let's see if I'm still logged in. So you go to the CCDA Implementation-a-thon space, and under the 2019-01-12-13 implementation area, there is a resources page. And the resources page has all the different postings. It's where you get these slides that stay up to date for the prep sessions as we've been involving them. And here's the one, provenance, definition, and scope. And you can download that.
Perfect.
You can, see some of the comments that I put out there. But I really want to narrow us down next week when we talk about this, so that we are asking the right questions. When does it come away with that notion of, as a bare minimum, what should we be aiming to do? Because there is a notion of a bare minimum expressed in this document, and I didn't agree with it, that is the bare minimum. And so one of the things that we probably need to aim to hammer out is where's the edge of this minimum scope to get straight.
Right.
And if we can, if we can do that, then we start to have a little bit of progress and continue to work on, I think, definitions, that everybody ends up coming away with the same understanding of what data provenance is. There's not a lot of common language or common points of view yet. And so the more we talk about it and the more that we get people to socialize different ideas and sort of caucus around different ways of thinking about it, I think that's what it's going to take for us to solidify in some, at least acceptable level of starting point.
One specific thing that comes to mind for me is around an aggregator on sections that like vital signs and results, and how you indicate where the data came from. Like labs, you may know ABC Lab did that test, but what doctor ordered it? When you're aggregating it, was Dr. Smith the one? Did it come from his system, or did it come from, Dr. Jones? Or and I've seen it done in a number of ways. I'm not sure everyone agrees, but the more I look at the products out there, aggregation is becoming more and more something being done in the industry.
Yes, yes, and we should do that consistently. The biggest difference that I had between what was documented in that document and what I know to be a requirement is whether it's sufficient to know what organization created the information versus what person, what individual, what provider. And as we try to use this information to do quality measures and to understand who do I get back to if I have a question about this information? Is it sufficient to be documenting just at this organization level, or does data provenance in the 5 W's, does the who necessarily ask us to understand the individual who was creating that documentation?
What about the location too? An organization is not necessarily a location. And in quality, when they do chart chases, that's a real important thing.
Yeah. Yep. So I was looking at a little bit towards the eye of, what we've been talking about in DaVinci, and for this information to be relevant for some of the payer use cases. And so some of my comments, I think, kind of have that flavor to it, but I'll be interested to hear what you think as well. And we'll be looking forward to hopefully a much higher participation rate next week as we get together again on a Wednesday. So our next session, I'm going to go back to looking at the overall view of these prep sessions. Where was it? Right here. So we'll just close with a reminder that the prep sessions, let's see, does the black box appear when I go in full screen mode, or is it just, has it stopped?
I don't see it now.
Okay,
I don't
great.
see it at all.
So here we are back in our rotation onto Wednesdays. So next week, 2 to 3 o'clock, Wednesday, December 5th, we'll have that discussion about what is the best way to use our time and what do we really want to focus on, because provenance is so expansive. How are we going to target our discussion to come up with something that's helpful and relevant for making some talk about what we will be planning to get ourselves ready on around CCDA on fire. Until then, unless there are, do you have any other questions about getting ready or registering or anything? Okay, well, have a great rest of your week. And until then, I will see you on Wednesday, December 5th.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, I do exist. I'm gone next week again, though, so apologies in advance. Finally. This was supposed to be summer PTO. Well, actually, we're going to Vegas. So it's probably better to go this time of year, but My kids were born there. Yeah, it was home for about 15 years for us. So they're now 21 and they want to go back and see what it's really about. Definitely. Well, they've been there since, but they haven't been there since they're 21. Right. Lisa.